In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite options for making vibey keys sounds in Logic Pro 10. This will work on a lot of different genres, whether it's R&B, soul, trap, lo-fi hip-hop, future bass, whatever. The idea is to have a warm, dark, supporting instrument that keeps depth and emotion throughout your track. The best part is that with these instruments, you can make your track sound dated and old school, or futuristic and new. I'm going to share 3 of my favorite options now, and a little extra tip at the end. Let's get into it. Okay, for the first option, I'm going to talk about piano. Now, Logic has a lot of really great built-in pianos, like the Steinway piano and the Yamaha Grand. But for this video, I'm going to be showing one of my favorite third-party pianos that's actually free. It's made by SPITFIRE Audio. It's part of the Labs collection, and it's called Soft Piano. It's a little bit darker, doesn't have a lot of high sparkle and brightness, but I actually like that for a lot of tracks because I find that the Steinway in Logic is a little too bright for my taste. So I've loaded up the chords from Rainy Day, which is one of my songs. So I'm just going to simply show the Labs interface. There's a reverb slider here. It can sound really cool when it's drowned in reverb like that. And I think a way to make normal piano sounds really vibey is just adding effects like reverbs and stuff. Now for option 2, we're going to talk about E-pianos, specifically the ones built in Logic, Rhodes emulations, Wurlitzer emulations. So if I make a copy of this, mute the original. If we open up Vintage Electric Piano, we can hear how the initialized setting sounds. Sounds cool. So there's a ton of presets within here. They're different emulations of actual instruments. I think that one sounds really good. And there's a lot of built-in effects. Obviously your volume and bass boost, but you've got some drive settings over here. You want to add just a little bit of warmth and saturation to it. Some EQ settings, usually keep those fairly neutral. Got stuff like phasers, tremolos, choruses. And then over in the details tab, you've got even more things that you can change. So this more has to do with the instrument itself. So like the warmth of the tuning, stuff like that, you can go through that. Now the final one I want to talk about, and this is kind of the meat of this video, is creating your own vibey keys sounds using a synthesizer. So in this video, I'm going to be using Serum, but you can also do this with ES2, Alchemy, any other third-party synthesizer that you want. So if we just open up a new instance of Serum, I'll mute what I've got before. We can drag down our chords. Usually when I'm doing something like this, I'll use sine waves. You also can use something like a triangle or even harsher waves like saws or squares. But if you do that, just make sure to filter out a lot of the higher frequency harmonics. So if we've got simple sines loaded up, we can play the chords and see how it sounds. Cool, that's pretty and warm already. It's a little static though. It's not really changing much. So we can do some things to make it a bit more interesting. So one thing I'd like to do is add a portamento or a glide, and that's gonna just have a subtle kind of pitch bend in between different notes. And I usually put it up to around 80 milliseconds, but we can experiment. Maybe a little faster actually. That's cool. Something else that I like to do to make these sounds a little bit more interesting is take a pitch LFO and put it on the fine tune for the waveform. So we'll take this LFO one right here, can bring it up to the fine tune, can bring it down to maybe, let's see, 15 cents. It's just going to give that kind of subtle, like, pitch vibe to it. We can curve these a bit so they're a little more gradual. Smooth it out a bit. Now, something that is important to do usually is to be really careful with the attack. When you have a really fast attack like that, you'll get some pops and clicks at the beginning of your notes. So usually I'll bring it up to about 5 milliseconds. It depends on the sound that you're going for, and some sounds actually are cool with a really sharp attack like that. But usually with these more subtle keys, it's better to have kind of slower attacks so it fades in a bit. Yeah. Another thing you can do to make it a little bit more interesting is to add a noise oscillator. So if you go over here, Serum has tons of different noise samples built into the noise oscillator. It's configured so it's only going to fire while you're actually playing those chords. You can change the pitch of it. Select a different sample here. Just really subtle. We can filter it out too. And if you select this keyboard button, then it's going to change the pitch of the noise depending on what chord you're playing. Pretty subtle again. I think that sounds pretty good. Another thine you can do if you want your sine waves to sound a little bit more interesting is to put a slight bend on the waveform. And that's going to create some really subtle harmonics that aren't crazy bright, especially since we're filtering. But it's going to make it a little bit more exciting. So we can experiment with this. I usually do a bend plus, but you could do a minus as well. This sounds cool. It's kind of like an old radio sound, sort of. Do a little bit of a slower glide on there. Almost like an organ kind of sound. So like I said, what sets these sounds apart really is that they're usually really dark and they don't have a lot of high frequency information. So you can experiment with using different waveforms, especially in Serum, as long as you're filtering out all that high stuff. So we could try, this is a saw, super bright. We can pull back the cutoff. Maybe a little bit of a steeper slope. Sounds cool. Let's try a different one. This is kind of a different saw triangle thing. That's cool. Square wave. Still sounds really warm. You could also go through the menus and find tons of different waveforms in here. One I really like is this pulse wave Juno. Some different wavetable positions for this one. And if you have a wavetable like that, you can even load up your LFO on the wavetable position and cycle through the different shapes. A little bit of a slower LFO. Go a bar. Something else I like to do is to change the decay on these sounds a little bit to make them a bit more realistic so they're not just droning on and on. So I can reduce the sustain to maybe -10, bring the decay to like 3,000 or 3 seconds. Bend this a bit. Just gonna make it sound a little bit more like a real instrument because real instruments don't sustain forever. And then something I usually do with instruments like this is I'll do a low cut to make room for the bass. You lose a little bit of that warmth, but that's gonna come right back when you add your bass. Now once I've got my keys instrument done, something I like to do is duplicate the track. And then I'll simplify the chords a little bit. What I do usually is I'll select all of them and put them up a whole octave. You can hold Alt, Shift, and Up arrow to move them up an octave. So now it sounds like that. This is sort of a trick for getting a pad to go in the background behind your keys. So usually I'll add a couple of reverbs on here. I really like to use ROM by Native Instruments. Has a lot of cool modulation and kind of granular effects. Add another reverb. I like R-verb by Waves. Bring that back. Just kind of twinkling in the background. And we put back our chords. Something I like to do, especially for pads like this, is use multiple voices. And you can definitely do this with your lead keys as well, but it's going to push your sound stereo. And a lot of times I like to have my keys in mono so that they have most power, but it's up to you. But for pads, I usually like to bring them out really wide. So we could do 10 voices, pretty subtle detune. Now here's those chords just by themselves, the keys. It sounds cool, but it's a little boring. We bring back the pad. Adds a whole nother layer. An honorable mention on the topic of pads is the same series that the soft piano came from, the SPITFIRE Audio Labs. They have tons of different pads and key sounds, so make sure to check those out. Those are some of my favorite techniques for making Vibey keys in Logic, especially using Serum. There's tons more you can do with this. If you have any ideas about how to make cool key sounds in Logic or with Serum or any other synth, leave a comment down below and let me know. Thanks for watching.